right, faking life, or AI and robots and cyborgs. Oh my! This is sort of the core of my area of work. I wrote my dissertation on transhumanism, so I'm excited about this one. I'm hopeful that I will leave a bit more time for questions at the end of this session, and of course questions about any of the things that we've talked about, not just faking life. Artificial intelligence, providing a definition of artificial intelligence is something of an academic industry in itself. So when I was researching for an earlier presentation, trying to come up with a good, concise definition of AI, there are just a lot of them. But I like this one. It's from Jason Thacker's The Age of AI. I believe he works for the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptists. Very interesting book on artificial intelligence. He says it's an emerging field of technology defined as non-biological intelligence, where a machine is programmed to accomplish complex goals by applying knowledge to the task at hand. Stanford University commissioned a 100-year study on artificial intelligence, and it speculates that the lack of a precise, universally accepted definition has probably helped the field to grow, blossom, and advance because it keeps it from being too hemmed in, too narrowly focused. So this is I would recommend to you Thacker's The Age of AI, if that's something that you find you're interested in at the end of this talk. AI has a lot of implications. One of the first is big data, and one of the ways in which that intersects with healthcare is with our electronic medical records. I believe the next time I'll give this talk, I will be in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the home of Epic, and my doctor uses Epic. Probably a lot of yours do as well. It is a massive electronic medical record system. And I'm not trying to imply, I'm not trying to say that there's anything nefarious going on, but it is very interesting that there is detailed medical information on a whole lot of us all in one place. There is some work that's being done with full releases and more or less full informed consent where data is being aggregated from different systems. I don't know whether Epic participates in that or not. But one of the things that we're finding is that it's not all that hard to figure out who we are. So they hand over anonymized data, and with just a few different points, it's very easy to put that data back together. I had a student in one of my classes a couple of years ago who works for one of the large pharmaceutical companies up in Lake County as a researcher, and she was saying this is really a huge issue, that in some ways, given the power of artificial intelligence, it's not really possible to anonymize data anymore, health data, because there's just too much in there about you that's too specific to you. And so that's an ongoing concern in the sort of healthcare research, healthcare adjacent research industry, because the flip side of it is we're getting a lot of really good information out of it. And we're looking forward to being able to really tailor treatments. So there might be something that works terrific for me, doesn't work at all for you. Well, how can we figure that out? How can we know that? So it's not that the questions aren't interesting and that the outcome won't be good. It's just that there are these anonymity questions. Big data is the information characterized by high volume, high velocity, and high variety. These are things that we all struggle with, right? I mean, we can only read so many books in a year, high volume. We can only read them so fast, high velocity. And we tend to focus on 2 or 3 different genres, high variety. AI struggles with none of that. Second, surveillance and privacy. The ability to analyze large information assets makes it possible, perhaps even easy, this is what I was talking about, to re-aggregate data. A 2019 study published in Nature Communications discovered that 99.98% of Americans would be correctly re-identified in any data set that has 15 demographic attributes. So If AI can find out 15 things about you, it can figure out who you are in a data set. Employment. Limitations on privacy have clear implications for employment. Beyond that, AI is seeing increasing use in human resources, particularly in recruiting and hiring. So if you are applying for a job, you're probably going to initially be screened by some sort of AI that looks at your resume, that looks at your experience, and tries to rate whether you're a good candidate for the job, and if you are a candidate, how good a candidate you are for the job. And then warfighting. I know we have a couple of members of the military here. The United States, through DARPA, is doing a great deal of research to improve our warfighting. And, we're not the only ones. China, Russia, they are all applying technology to warfighting. A cyborg is a human being augmented by robotic-like technology. So there's a sort of continuum along the bionic, cyborg, robot, android sort of spectrum here. So there's maybe a few of us in here that remember the Bionic Man. The cyborg was kind of a step beyond that. Then a robot. So the robot wouldn't have any sort of human sort of flesh component. And then an android would be even more fully autonomous, more fully capable. Chief Justice John Roberts, in an opinion for Riley versus California in 2014, made a pretty interesting statement. The case is someone was stopped for a traffic violation. The police searched his phone, and they found some things on there that led to his arrest on some other charges. He fought it all the way up through the system to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was a violation of his privacy rights for the police to have searched his phone in the way that they did. And he wrote this: "Modern cell phones are now such a pervasive and insistent part of daily life that the proverbial visitor from Mars might conclude they were an important feature of the human anatomy." It's hard to disagree with that, and that was 2014. So today, and more so. I want to show a video. This is about a 2-minute video. It comes from a longer report on Nightline, and I kind of cut it down. But this is one of the directions that artificial intelligence, the robots, are going, and it has a direct bearing on healthcare.
We're then introduced to Hanson Robotics' newest family member.
Grace, this is my friend Britt from ABC.
Hi, Grace. It's lovely to meet you.
Hi, Britt.
Born out of the needs of the pandemic, Grace is a medical robot aimed at assisting the elderly at a time when human contact can be deadly.
Have you been vaccinated?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Grace is designed as a platform that can autonomously go to interact with patients, while at the same time taking biosigns, bioreadings, taking temperature, then deliver these kinds of social stimulations for alleviating loneliness. Loneliness kills people. Loneliness makes people depressed.
Grace gives me a test run of her skills.
I will take your temperature reading and pulse with this little thermal camera on my chest.
Okay.
See? You are 36.6 degrees Celsius, by the way.
Wow.
No risk of COVID. And then I share that important data back to the doctors and nurses at the institution.
You detect speech patterns, so if an elderly person has maybe the onset of dementia, you might be able to recognize that, Grace, and then they could get help.
Yes.
The company is hoping to mass produce a beta version of Grace by next year. Hanson says, forget the rampant killer bots. It's the dark side of AI, the kinds we can't see, that we should be worrying about.
The AI is not going to hurt us like Terminator anytime soon that we know of, but it's more insidious ways that AI can affect our privacy, our data, influence people's opinions. And part of what I want to ensure is that if these robots do become alive and sentient, conscious like people, they need to care about us.
So there's a lot to notice there. perhaps most of all, that they need to care about us. I mean, who's in charge of that, Chief? But the insidious ways that they affect public opinion. This has been, back through the last couple of election cycles, a big question about what are we seeing online? Why are we seeing what we're seeing online? And then the medical robot, that's kind of interesting. Did you notice her name is Grace? Female in appearance, how about that? That weird, odd delay. Maybe that'll get better. And then the line, a social simulation for alleviating loneliness. I think that's what we all really want, is a social simulation that will alleviate our loneliness. Sherry Turkle, who's at MIT, has several books on sort of our digitally mediated age. So far as she's not a Christian. I don't know whether she's a person of faith at all, but really, really interesting books. And she, part of, I think her background is in psychology. Part of what got her studying and thinking about technology on a deeper level was the idea of giving sort of robotic pets to senior citizens, particularly people in nursing homes, to kind of keep them company. And she has come to the conclusion that this is a terrible thing to do to old people. It's an abandonment. Japan now, and if you know the demographics of Japan, they're very inverted. There's considerably more senior citizens than there are young people. And so they're using a lot of these kind of robotic pets and even robotic caregivers. I don't think quite to this level. That, by the way, that video was filmed in Hong Kong, so the guy's factory, for whatever reason, is in Hong Kong, which is interesting. But it's a form of abandonment. So this may be another to sort of add to Hauerwas's quote, we're not killing the old people, and we're keeping them company. That may end up being a Christian distinctive. These are members of our community. But again, it relies on us as we age being willing to be cared for by the members of our community. And that's no small hurdle in some instances. An important distinction that we need to think through and talk about is the therapy and enhancement distinction. Therapy, most of what we think of as medicine today is therapy. It's the idea of restoring a normal state of health and fitness. The word normal, of course, is debatable. What it means to be in normal health is, of course, debatable, but you get the idea that most medicine is aimed at getting us healthy again, getting us back to health. Whereas enhancement is expressly aimed at altering normal of the body or of the psyche. It's the idea of augmenting or improving native capacities and performances. So, I mean, the very easy, well-known example would be, if you're my age, steroids. They're now apparently called performance-enhancing drugs, which we banned in sport. Although, believe me, there are plenty of people arguing what we need is a performance-enhancing drug league, where everybody gets roided up or whatever and goes up and competes. But this is a very important distinction, and there are situations in which a lot can ride on the therapy enhancement distinction when we're thinking about medical ethics and bioethics, and perhaps there's no more prominent example than transhumanism. So let me just start with a conclusion here. Spoiler alert, transhumanism is, at its core, deeply religious. And so are some of our own views on technology more broadly. I'll flesh this out over the next few minutes, starting with an overview of the transhumanist movement. What, after all, is transhumanism? And then I'll turn to some thoughts on Christian faithfulness in our digitally mediated, technologically awe-inspiring world. The term transhumanism was coined simply by combining the words transitional and human. Most transhumanists trace the origin of the term to a 1927 essay by Julian Huxley, who was the brother of Brave New World author Aldous Huxley, in which he, Julian, suggested transhumanism as the name for humanity transcending humanity, or man transcending man in the language of the day. Quote, by realizing new possibilities of and for his human nature. At a basic level, transhumanists believe that science and technology are intrinsic to our humanity. As part of what it means to be human is to progress scientifically. Part of what it means is to discover, to build, to advance. And that these scientific and technological advancements should be put to use to transform the human condition. And that's another phrase we'll encounter and talk a bit more about, the human condition. The World Transhumanist Association, and yes, there is a World Transhumanist Association, they define transhumanism as a way of thinking about the future that is based on the premise that the human species in its current form does not yet represent the end of our development, but rather a comparatively early phase. To put it another way, transhumanism is the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and the desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition through applied reason, especially by developing and making widely available technologies to eliminate aging and to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. So note well that the transformation in view here is a radical transformation. It's a transformation of human nature and human being itself. They state, just as we use rational means to improve the human condition and the external world, we can also use such means to improve ourselves, the human organism. In doing so, we are not limited to traditional humanistic methods, such as education and cultural development. We can also use technological means that will eventually enable us to move beyond what some would consider or think of as human. Notice how they set their views and goals on a continuum with education and cultural development. If we can improve humanity this much through education, we can do so much more to improve humanity through the focused application of science and technology. Notice also the multiple meanings of the term transhumanism. It denotes the transition from human to post-human existence, as well as the activities and attitudes one is expected to promote in order to bring about this ideal post-human future. The transformation from human to post-human will represent a decisive break with and an advancement beyond humanity as it currently exists. It will be the next evolutionary step beyond humanity. It will be truly post-human. Now, post-humanity might come about through merging humans and machines. It could be one way, the sort of cyborg model. It could come about by uploading human consciousness, and there's a whole variety of science fiction shows out there that talk about this uploading human consciousness into computers, onto computer networks, into robot or synthetic bodies, or some kind of combination. You could float around on the internet for a while, and then you could download yourself into a robot body and go out and explore and come back and whatever. Or post-humanity may be comprised of artificial intelligence or superintelligence that human beings initiate, and by which we are then subsequently surpassed, superseded, replaced. There's one source I read, I used it in my dissertation, and my advisor laughed out loud that it's possible that, this is someone speculating positively about the prospect of superintelligence, that probably what we should be hoping for is that we'll develop a superintelligence that would keep us as pets. So if I could have the existence that my dog has, yeah, that's almost as good as a simulation that alleviates loneliness. Here's an article, or here's a headline from Quantum Magazine from just last month. Researchers build AI that builds AI. So this is exactly the goal that's going on. Now, I will say that this headline, having read the article, overstates what's going on. I know it's shocking that a headline would do that. And it involves some really complicated math that I do not follow at all. But you can see the direction here. This is the aim, like build an AI that builds another AI. So where do these transhumanist ideas come from? Where do they emerge? Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom points out the quest for immortality relayed in our all favorite, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is an indicator that human beings have long desired to overcome human limitations, probably for as long as there have been human beings. We just don't like being limited. The Genesis account of death entering the world demonstrates a desire to understand why death is part of life. More recently and more directly, transhumanism can be traced to the rise of humanism, particularly rational humanism, which emphasizes empirical science and critical reason, rather than revelation and religious authority, as ways of learning about the natural world and our place within it, and of providing a grounding for morality. So you can see how the development of the theory of evolution has sort of provided this ground for, well, we've come this far, life on Earth has come this far, let's keep it going with our science and technology. And of course, works of culture, novels, films, television series reflect and help to shape ideas of what's desirable, what's possible, what's probable. One literature professor points out that there's an important relationship between scientific texts, these peer-reviewed scientific articles, and non-scientific texts, or novels, or TV shows. The scientific texts, she writes, often reveal, as literature cannot, the foundational assumptions that gave theoretical scope and artifactual efficacy to a particular approach. On the other hand, literary texts often reveal, as scientific works cannot, the complex cultural, social, and representational issues tied up with conceptual shifts and technological innovations. So literature imagines possibilities that are, at least theoretical, extensions of scientific and technological advancements. And I think, particularly if you look back at the history of science fiction over the past 100 years, you can see exactly this. And of course, science fiction has had an influential role in debates about technology, especially works like Frankenstein or Brave New World, 1984. More recently, we have writings by Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, Neil Stephenson, Ernest Cline, and others. This literature professor indicates that the path to our present transhuman, post-human moment began when information began to be seen as disembodied, unrelated to, unaffected by the medium in which it's contained. On this view, the essential aspect of the human person is the information, the coding, if you will, that makes up our history, our thought processes, our memories, ourselves. Or we might say expressive individualism. The self is a will seeking to express itself. When information loses its body, singular, equating humans and computers is incredibly easy, for the materiality in which the thinking mind is instantiated appears incidental to its essential nature. So there are a variety of themes that kind of recur in transhumanism. I'm only going to talk about two of these, but just to lay them out for you, they talk a lot about overcoming aging. This is a really, really big deal. And then secondarily, overcoming cognitive shortcomings. What would it be like to never get tired, to never forget, to be able to learn anything that you wanted? And then overcoming involuntary suffering. And you can draw your own conclusions about voluntary suffering, but yes, you're probably right. And then overcoming our confinement to Earth. And I'll touch on that just very briefly. Aging is perhaps the most intuitively accessible transhuman goal, or overcoming aging. It's simply the desire to live longer. Transhumanists tend to use the language of overcoming aging or enhancing longevity or even radical life extension. The ultimate goal is effective immortality or the ability to avoid, and I'm quoting here, unwanted death. And again, if you're thinking, well, what do they mean by wanted death? You're probably right. Of course, the idea is not simply to live longer, but to live longer as a healthy person, or to radically extend one's active health span. Associated with longevity, then, is the eradication of disease and the addition of increased strength and endurance. So many transhumanists are working to live long enough so that they can take advantage of hoped-for medical and technological advancements that will counter and reverse the effects of aging. This is known as longevity escape velocity. It's the point at which new medical and technological developments every year can add more than a year to a person's life. Longevity escape velocity. Overcoming cognitive shortcomings or increasing intellectual capacity may come about through drugs, through brain-computer interfaces, or by scanning and uploading or reconstructing the human brain in ways that allow for, quote, whole brain emulation. Some also speak of increased ethical capacity or moral enhancement. This could come about as an aspect of increased intelligence. It could come about through genetic or biochemical enhancement. So imagine if there was a pill that would make you more moral. Whose morals? Left unsaid. Or through artificial intelligence. There's always AI we can fall back on, because they can help us with making the really thorny ethical decisions. The singularity is what they're looking for and waiting on. This is an important and recurring theme. The idea is a sudden shift expected to occur when human beings build artificial or machine intelligence that is smarter than human beings and capable of building even smarter intelligences. The term singularity comes to us from physics. It denotes the point of a radical change beyond which nothing can be known. So it ends up making for a nice can you can kick down the road. Well, we don't know what things will be like after the singularity. The center of a black hole is probably the most well-known singularity. We don't have any real idea what's going on the other side of a black hole. It is a singularity. And then you've got some sort of theological views that come into play here. Desjardins argued that the universe will eventually evolve toward a unified consciousness, which he termed the noosphere. This will involve not simply the networking of human minds, but of human minds and technology. Eventually, on this view, everything in the universe will culminate into an omega point of God in all and all in God. However, most transhumanists would reject any kind of reference to or injection of religious ideas as simply wishful thinking. Transhumanism is, for the most part, an entirely material, rational, scientific enterprise. But there are some theological-ish transhumanists. You might not be surprised to know that there's a Mormon transhuman association, for example. And perhaps you can even see how some of these ideas overlap with some aspects of Mormon theology. There's a whole continuum of perspectives about these goals and these views. Zoltan Istvan. Did anybody vote for Zoltan Istvan in the 2016 election? Because he ran for president. And this was his platform. In the transhumanist age, we will reach utopia. Crime drops to zero. Poverty ends. Violence drops. At some point, we will become a race of individuals who are pretty nice to each other. So this is one man's transhuman goal. And at the other extreme are people like Charles Rubin, who argues that transhumanism and posthuman have no meaning. There's no condition that could be described in either of these ways. It's either an impossibility, some sort of actually deficient human condition, not an enhanced human condition, or an amplification of, but no real change to, what it really means to be human. Between these extremes, of course, are those who recognize that the technologies that we have and that we are developing are shaping us as individuals, as families, as communities, and indeed as humanity. Journalist Walter Isaacson says that we are on the cusp of what he calls the third great revolution of modern times. These three revolutions arose from the discovery, beginning just over a century ago, of the three fundamental kernels of our existence: the atom, the bit, and the gene. The physics revolution led to the atomic bomb. nuclear power, space travel, and much more. The digital revolution led to the microchip, to computers, to the internet, and so on. And now we stand on the cusp of the life science revolution, which will lead to the ability to alter the very nature of what it means to be human. And transhumanists think that's the greatest thing ever, and some of the rest of us are a little bit concerned. Isaacson writes, figuring out if and when to edit our genes will be one of the most consequential decisions of the 21st century. This, of course, brings us back to the previous session on making life. Bioethics issues are, it turns out, deeply intertwined. Even transhumanism itself remains distant from our lives. Even if transhumanism remains distant from our lives and our thoughts, some of the ideas and technological progress toward a better, even if not wholly utopian future, is undoubtedly a part of our cultural, climate, and cultural narrative. Michael Burdett writes in a book called Eschatology and the Technological Future, let that sink in, even if the common person rejects or is repulsed by transhumanism as a contemporary movement, even if this particular movement ultimately dies the death of other forgotten trends that have gone this way in the past, these ideas are part of a much larger cultural imagination, which is resilient, and it seems here to stay. So this fun slide, follow the money. Alphabet Incorporated, which used to be Google, now Alphabet Incorporated. One of their divisions, one of their companies is called Calico. They're working expressly on this overcoming aging problem. D is for DeepMind. DeepMind is working on neural networks, so the brain-computer interface problem. S is for Singularity Group. So this is, it used to be called Singularity University, and they were doing these really high-priced executive training sessions trying to help you prepare for the coming technological future. They've recently had to regroup and reform over a couple of scandals, one of them being a super spreader event in February of 2020, I think, which is kind of interesting. And I think I have Ray Kurzweil's name there. Kurzweil, looking around. At our church, we have a keyboard that has Kurzweil's name on it. Kurzweil is a man who's very, very wealthy because he invented some of the earliest of the synthesizer technologies back in the late 1960s. He's now like a vice president with Alphabet Incorporated. And of course, G is for Google. All of these projects have Google money, Google resources, Google reach being poured into them. The other is Neuralink Corporation. Maybe you saw the video, I guess it was back in the summer, where they are working on computer-brain interfaces, and they plug these into the brains of pigs. I think they've already got it to Bluetooth, which is nice, so you don't have to have a wire. But their three things are understanding the brain. There's no problem with that. Interfacing with the brain. Okay, now we're starting to have to think. And engineering the brain. And of course, they have Elon Musk money, and Elon Musk is a guy who gets stuff done. So these are no small operations. These are no minor players. One writer points out that transhumanism tends to function as a religion for many of the people who are in it, and probably particularly for those who most strongly deny that it functions as a religion for them. This person writes, there are sacraments of nutrition supplements, the ritual of cryonics, the prophecy of indefinite healthy life extension, the spirits of substrate-independent minds, apocalyptic and messianic postures toward artificial intelligence, the millennial paradisical hope of life and abundance beyond present notions of suffering and poverty, and ultimately, the pantheon of post-humanity. Of course, there's much more to it than that, and we would view it quite differently. Transhumanism is ultimately presenting an anthropology, a soteriology, and eschatology. The transhumanist perspective is, at its core, deeply religious. I mentioned that most trace the origin of the term transhumanism to Julian Huxley, Others, however, particularly those with an interest in the intersection of religion and transhumanism, trace the origin of the term all the way back to Dante and his coinage of transhumanior in Paradiso to describe the degree of transformation involved in entering paradise. In a thoughtful piece, one essayist describes the setting like this: Dante has completed his journey through paradise and is ascending into the spheres of heaven when his human flesh is suddenly transformed. He's vague about the nature of this new body, and in fact, the metamorphosis leaves the poet, who has hardly paused for breath over the span of some 60 cantos, speechless. Dante writes, "Words may not tell of that transhuman change." This brings to my mind Philippians 3. Philippians 3, 17 through 4:1 is a rich, rich text, and there's much that could be said about it. But in the time I have, I'd like to point out just two things. Verse 17 tells us to join together in following my example, brothers and sisters. And just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. In his 2016 book, Ethics in the Conflict of Modernity, Alistair McIntyre devotes a significant section to moral exemplars, and I've mentioned them previously today. Again, these are not people who are perfect. They are people who have wrestled with life's challenges and have grown in wisdom. And of course, the way in which we look to moral exemplars is by engaging with the work of those who have wrestled with difficult issues, such as the place of various technologies in our lives. And so to that end, I can recommend a whole bunch of things, but I want to recommend my organization, CBHD, our website, cbhd.org. We have a ton of resources there to think about that. And then second, the text states very clearly in verses 20 and 21, our citizenship is in heaven. And we eagerly wait a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. The Lord Jesus Christ will transform our bodies, literally the body of our humiliation. So as you see, it's not that transhumanists are onto a problem that isn't really there. They're hitting on something real and true, but they call it the human condition. One commentary points out that for Paul, the body belongs to the state of humiliation caused by sin, and is thus always characterized by physical decay, indignity, weakness, and ultimately death. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The transhumanist technological solution is profoundly misguided. It's based in an anthropology that sees human beings merely as information to be processed, wills to be expressed. It offers an eschatology of human striving and of human making. Scripture, however, offers an anthropology that sees human beings as bearers of the very image of God, placed in relationships of giving and receiving, of loving and caring, in community, and an eschatology of divine work and divine power. One commentary says Jesus' resurrection is the guarantee of their resurrection, folks, of our resurrection. And his resurrected body is the prototype and paradigm of theirs, of ours. None of what I'm saying is meant to deny the goods that technology can bring into our lives. I mean, I'm reading off an iPad. But it is to question, seriously question, where we locate our hopes and our confidence. The editor of First Things recently pointed out that many of us are functional transhumanists. We act as though with proper and rigorous application of science and technology, we can fend off death. Every accident is preventable. With the right safeguards and early detection, every disease can be cured. This amounts to saying, if we could get things just right, nobody needs to die. Jim McClendon, who I mentioned on one of the very first slides this morning, asserted that one of the key aspects of Christian ethics is what he termed the anastatic strand of ethics, or the Easter hope. What he means by this is that at the very center of Christianity is the Easter event, the resurrection of Christ, And it is a radical inbreaking that decisively alters everything. Because of the radical nature of this inbreaking, and because of the scope of the alteration, this Easter hope has implications for all areas of ethics. When it comes to transhumanism, the future ultimately not solely what human beings will make of it, but rather it is what God will do. Therefore, we must always leave room for, indeed, live in anticipation of the inbreaking, anesthetic work of the triune God. Technology will not ultimately solve our deepest problems. It can ease some burdens and alleviate some symptoms, but it will never fully deliver us from disease, decline, and death. Only the triune God, who created us and who invites us into loving, covenantal fellowship that overflows from God's own being, can do that. Perhaps the way in which this is most clearly evident is in the contrast between the transhumanist hope of post-human transformation and the Christian hope of resurrection. Jeffrey Bishop, a friend of CBHD, writes, "The resurrected body is not a cyborg, as some imagine it. It is the resurrection of the frail material that has captured the traces of its life, the particular wounds and injuries, the marks of, for example, having lived under the brutal Texas sun in the hard Texas soil. The resurrected body is not a cyborg. It's so much more than that. So then, may we, as Paul wrote, my brothers and sisters, stand firm in the Lord Jesus Christ, who, by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body." Thank you.